Chapter 13. The Secret Library. Hoggie and Scooter spent the next few hours exploring the secret library. Slowly they discovered that it was not limited to the 4.5 floor, but extended throughout the entire building. Some of the rooms of the secret library were quite oddly fashioned, triangular, crescent-shaped, 7-cornered, with the floors slanted at 45 degrees, with the ceilings that were just a metre high, or, on the contrary, tall like those of a well. The rooms were connected one to another by doors, by corridors, by crawl tunnels, by stairs, and even by simple holes in the floors and ceilings. It seemed that Alexander Libri took every inch of empty space left from the construction of the city library and put it to use. As a result, inside the city library's building there were actually 2 libraries, one well lit and crowded with students and scholars, and another dim, quiet, and deserted. The secret library's collection was also rather unusual. Here the books were not arranged by literary genre, or a field of study, as they frequently are in ordinary libraries, but rather by Alexander Libri's own passions and interests. Here there were no history, geography, or science sections, but there were rooms dedicated exclusively to such matters as vanished realms, crazy inventions, and sea adventures. There was, in the secret library, even a special room designated as Monsters. If Hoggie and Scooter found themselves locked for the night in a sweet shop, they still would not be as happy as they were to wander the secret library, finding more and more books and subjects that aroused their curiosity and stirred their imagination. Some of the books in the architect's secret collection were fairly new. Hoggie and Scooter knew either their titles or the names of their authors, but most of them were really old, so old the children had never even heard about them. Some books were simple and plain, with frayed spines and dog-eared corners, yet some were wrapped in beautiful leather jackets, or encased in bejewelled gold plates. Until that day, Hoggie had only seen books like that in documentaries about world's famous museums. One of the books attracted Hoggie's attention by its size. It was as big and as thick as a briefcase, and just as heavy, and by the beauty of its red leather binding. The book's pages of gilded parchment were held together with a golden clasp, and when the girl opened it, she was bedazzled even more by the handwritten stories and magnificent illustrations, all, with a few exceptions, depicting dragons. Dragons lurking at the bottom of mountain lakes, dragons sleeping in caves, and dragons soaring in the skies. "This book is amazing!" Hoggie looked at the book's title, The Nerucan. Scooter peered over his friend's shoulder, and too studied the pictures of the dragons. "You know what this is?" he realized suddenly. "That book on dragon lore the Museum of London man told me about. So these books really are from Alexander Libri's collection." Hoggie studied the book's neat handwriting. "What language is this?" "It isn't Spanish or French or Latin," Scooter said confidently. "German?" "No." Scooter shook his head. "It must be one of those languages that nobody uses any more, you know, like Middle English or Old Norse." "Too bad we cannot read it," Hoggie sighed. "It looks interesting." One of the rooms in the secret library looked just like a real living room. It had comfortable chairs, a small sofa, and a coffee table. It even had a fireplace. The fireplace was not real, but it made the room look very cosy all the same. The room with the fake fireplace contained nothing but children's books. Hoggie was already reading Alexander Dumas, Walter Scott, Victor Hugo, and other exciting books written for grown-ups. Still, it felt great to leaf once again through the beautifully illustrated editions of some of her favourite children's books, Mary Poppins, The Hobbit, and Tales by Hans Christian Andersen. "I'll be spending a lot of time here," Hoggie stated, her eyes scanning greedily the thousands of book spines, each bearing a more tempting title than the one before. Suddenly she saw a book with no title at all. The book was small, with a tattered cover of faded brown. It looked quite old. "This must be it," Hoggie thought. "The mirror." The book's pages were kept shut with a leather cord, to which a tiny medallion with a picture of the Greek letter omega was attached. Hoggy unwrapped the cord and opened the book. Its pages were blank.
"It's just a journal."
Hoggy was disappointed. At the very beginning of the journal, there was a frayed paper stub, where 2 or 3 pages had been torn out, as if someone had started keeping a diary, but then changed their mind. She stuck the journal into the pocket of her coat, and moved on with her search. As they journeyed deeper and deeper into the heart of the library, they came upon a long and narrow room. There was a faded sign over the room's threshold. Hoggy stood on her tiptoes and read it.
"The Gallery of Forbidden Books. I wonder what they have in here."
Several familiar names caught her eye. Tolstoy, Orwell, Twain.
"Wait a minute,"
Hoggy said.
"Twain? As in Mark Twain?"
She picked up the book and read the title.
"The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn." It's a children's book. How could it be banned?
"Well, when Twain wrote it, there was still racial segregation in America," Scooter explained, "and some people didn't like the story of a friendship between a white boy and a black man."
"How do you know this?"
"Mrs. Hamilton told us about it."
"I must have skipped that class,"
Hoggy noted with regret.
"Rights of Man," she continued. "The Grapes of Wrath. Don Quixote."
Suddenly Hoggy's gaze fell upon a book whose cover bore the picture of a boy in a long black robe and round eyeglasses.
"Oh, come on," she said in disbelief. "I've read this book. Who in the world found it offensive?"
"Quite a few people," Scooter replied. "They thought it was too creepy, and so they banned it from their local school libraries." Hoggy just rolled her eyes. She put the book back on the shelf, and just as she did, something occurred to her.
"Scooter," she said, "this book, it's new."
"Well, actually, it's the first one in the series, so it isn't really that new." Hoggy shook her head.
"No, what I mean is, the book was published long after Alexander Libri's death. How did it get here, then?"
Scooter's face acquired a worried expression. "Somebody else must have put it here, which means that somebody else knows about the secret library." All of a sudden, the friends felt ill at ease. "Maybe we should just find the mirror and get out of here," Scooter suggested. However, by then it was nearly 8 o'clock, the time when the library would be locked for the night, and so the friends decided to postpone any further explorations until the following morning. They retraced their footsteps to the roof. There, Hoggy once again climbed onto the lion's back and pulled its ear. The entrance to the secret library shut so tight, not even a tiny chink could be seen in Saint Jerome's robe. The friends made their way through the attic, replaced the padlock on the door, and sneaked back into the foyer. By then, the library was closing, the last of its patrons hurrying down the main stairs. Hoggy and Scooter joined them, and, a few minutes later, they stepped out into the night-covered street. Scooter tilted his head and looked up at the dark shape of Saint Jerome.
"A secret library,"
he said.
"No one would believe us if we told them." "No, they probably wouldn't," Hoggy agreed. "But we're not going to tell anybody anyway."
"No one at all?" It was obvious that Scooter couldn't wait to brag about his discovery to somebody. "Not even to Catherine? I mean, technically, these are her books." Hoggy considered this for a moment.
"I don't think we should. There must be a reason why Alexander Libri did not tell anyone, not even his own family. Besides, we can't risk the library people finding out about this place, because if they do, they'll lock it up, and then we'll never find the mirror. No, let's keep this under our hats, at least for now."
From the day Hoggy and Scooter discovered the architect's amazing book collection, it was all they could think and talk about. Whatever free time they had, they'd spend it in the secret library, exploring its rooms or poring over the pages of its many astounding volumes. They even moved their study sessions to the secret library. The friends wondered for the longest time how Alexander Libri managed to keep the library's many rooms well lit in the absence of any windows. Eventually they discovered that there were a number of mirrors concealed in the walls and ceilings of the rooms, and that these mirrors reflected the natural light coming from outside.
"I've read about such things," Scooter said excitedly. "The ancient Mayans did this to illuminate their temples. There must be hidden shafts in the library's roof. It is through them that the sunlight comes inside, and is then guided by the mirrors throughout the secret library."
They held their study sessions in the wonders of the world, a large room filled to the ceiling with books on various natural wonders, beautiful stone monuments of Arizona, carved into fantastic shapes by winds and rains, birds that can find their way home from anywhere in the world, Indian elephants who can cross deep rivers, breathing through their trunks, raised above the water like a snorkel, and many, many others. Some of these books came very handy whenever Hoggie and Scooter were working on their biology and geography reports. One afternoon they were, as usual, in the secret library. Hoggie was writing a report on the life cycle of trees, Scooter by her side, scribbling something in his notebook. Hoggie had found quite a few books in the architect's library she thought she could use. She particularly liked the book titled The Remarkable Trees of the World. The book was very old, and had the most beautiful illustrations. With fascination, Hoggie studied the portraits of the Fredville oak of Kent, a tree so thick that 10 men would have to hold hands to embrace it, the Californian sequoias, the magnificent redwood trees that were already giants when the first Europeans landed in America, and the African baobabs, the trees that looked like enormous bottles. But what impressed Hoggie the most was the story of the wishing tree, a tree so ancient and so rare, no one even knew where it came from, and when. The book said that the Babylonians and the ancient Greeks believed that the wishing tree had remarkable powers. They could grant a person any wish. The picture that illustrated the story showed a tree weighted down with scarves, necklaces, and other personal items the ancient people hung on its branches as they made their wishes. Sadly, the story also said that eventually the wonderful trees fell victims to people's greed, because everyone wanted to have theirs, but no other person's wishes fulfilled. People would try to seize a wishing tree and lock it up in their houses, but the wishing trees could not live in a prison, and so, one by one, they died. Hoggie doubted that Ms. Chakrabarty would ever believe in the existence of a wishing tree, and so she put the remarkable trees aside, picked up the Encyclopedia of Plants, and carried on with her report. An hour later, her work finally done, Hoggie stretched her back, poured herself a cup of tea out of Scooter's thermos, and unwrapped one of the cheese sandwiches they had brought with them.
"I love this place," she said contentedly. "I used to think that the library was the coolest place in the world, and I still think it's pretty cool. But this—" she surveyed once again the architect's precious collection. "This is just awesome. It's a good thing they don't have a bathroom and a fridge here, or I would never leave." "Me too," Scooter agreed. He finished writing and announced, "Well, I'm all done with my English. Want to hear it?" That week, Miss Pitkin had asked them to write a short story. Scooter's story was about a bronze lion that sat for many years atop a library, watching people scurry up and down the street. The lion was bored. It would rather go for a walk than sit day after day beside its master, the bronze Saint Jerome. One day, the lion befriended a pigeon, and the pigeon convinced it that if it wanted something really badly, it could make it happen. And so, the following night, the lion jumped off its pedestal and went for a stroll around London. "I like it,"
Hoggie said.
"Thanks."
Scooter blushed with pleasure.
"I ran out of paper, so I took a page out of your journal. Is it all right?"
"It's fine,"
Hoggie replied, consulting her watch.
"Listen, it's nearly 8. We should go."
The friends began to pack their bags. Scooter tore his story out of Hoggie's journal. It was the very journal she had found in the room with the fake fireplace.
"I've never seen paper like that,"
he remarked, studying the brittle, greyish sheet, into which tiny skeletons of leaves were inserted here and there.
"I hear they can make paper out of elephant dung now,"
Hoggy said, taking the journal from him and stuffing it in her bag.
"Let's go. We don't want to be locked in here."
15 minutes later, Scooter caught a bus to Primrose Hill, and Hoggy, in her usual manner, walked home. As she was passing Icarus's, she noticed that the lights were still on in the bookshop, and when Hoggy climbed up the porch, she found the shop's door unlocked. Icarus was on his customary seat behind the counter, reading a book.
"Good evening, Mr. Icarus,"
Hoggy said, when the owner of the bookshop did not react to the sound of the doorbell.
"How come you're not closed yet?"
"Hoggy?" The little man lifted his eyes off the book and looked around, blinking. Hoggy had a distinct impression that he was not sure where he was. "What time is it?"
"It is almost 9.
"Oh, dear!" Icarus closed the book and began to put things behind the counter in order. "Time sure flies when I am in the shop." Hoggy suppressed a smile. Only Icarus Finn, with his imagination and his constant hunger for books, could make time fly in Icarus's new and old books. Any other sales clerk would die of boredom there, seeing as there were hardly any customers in the shop.
"What are you reading?"
Hoggy asked.
Mahabharata. Have you read it?
Hoggy shook her head.
In this case, you must. The most fascinating book.
"What's it about?"
Icarus pondered his young friend's question for a moment.
"I suppose, like all great books, it is about many things. It can be used to study history, geography, and archaeology. But first and foremost, it is an adventure story. One of the greatest adventure stories, in fact. That is why people still read it after 3, perhaps 4,000 years.
Hoggy looked at the book with appreciation.
4,000 years,
she said.
"It must be one interesting book. I wonder why I've never heard about it before."
"Oh, Hoggy," Icarus laughed benevolently, "you are only just beginning your journey into the world of great books. Besides, Mahabharata, as old as it is, has only recently been discovered by an ordinary reader like you and me."
"Why?"
"Well, for one thing, the book was written in Sanskrit, the language of ancient India, and so it took a while to translate it into English. And secondly, for a very long time, Mahabharata has been a secret book."
"A secret book?"
Hoggy repeated.
"Whatever do you mean?"
Icarus took off his glasses and rubbed them pensively with his handkerchief.
"You see, Hoggy, although Mahabharata was composed over 3 millennia ago, it was not actually written until much later. Of course, the ancient Indians invented writing long time ago, and they wrote thousands of remarkable books. But some books they prefer to pass one to another through the word of mouth."
"Why would they do that?"
Hoggy was puzzled.
"Wouldn't it be easier to just write them down? That way anyone can read those books."
"Ah,"
Icarus said, putting his glasses back on his nose,
"but that's just it. They did not want just anyone to read them."
"That's not fair."
"It sure isn't," Icarus agreed. "The world's knowledge belongs to everyone. And so the world's books, too, should belong to everyone. I hope, Hoggy, that one day everyone can have any book they want for free." He smiled. "I suppose it is a strange wish, coming from a bookseller, but the way things are going, I will not have this bookshop for long anyway."
"What do you mean?"
The bookshop owner sighed.
"Oh, I suppose you're going to hear of this sooner or later. The thing is, Hoggy, I may lose the shop in a month or 2.
"What?"
Hoggy could not believe it.
"Why? What happened?"
"I am afraid I am not a very good businessman, Hoggy." Icarus confessed. "It really is unfortunate that I should know so much about books and so little about running a bookshop. And this in the times when people prefer watching TV and playing video games to reading." He sighed again. "I don't know if you have noticed it, but I haven't had a whole lot of customers in the last year, and so I have been borrowing money from the bank to keep the shop open. And now they want their money back, and because I cannot pay, they will take away my shop and my books." Icarus's voice trembled at these last words, and he hurried to turn away from Hoggy, pretending to be stacking some papers under the counter.
"Oh, Mr. Icarus, I'm so sorry."
Hoggy was absolutely overcome by this terrible news.
"How much do you have to pay?"
£10,000.
Hoggy exhaled. That was more money than she and Aunt Michelle would spend in 6 months, and she could think of no scheme, no job that would earn her £10,000 in a matter of a month.
"I'm so sorry,"
she repeated.
Icarus patted her on the hand. "Don't be, Hoggy. It's not the end of the world. I'll find something else to do for a living. And as for the books, we still have our public library, don't we?"
It seemed that the bookseller had plenty of time to get used to the idea of losing his shop.
"And you and I can still see each other and talk about books."
"I guess,"
Hoggy said glumly. It would take her a lot longer to adapt to losing hers and Scooter's regular Friday night hangout. She was so distraught by Icarus's news that she forgot why she came to see the bookseller in the first place. But just then he himself reminded her about it.
"Oh dear,"
Icarus said, sizing up Hoggy's heavy backpack.
"the amount of textbooks they make you carry these days."
"It's not textbooks,"
Hoggy replied.
"It's something else. Something I wanted you to see."
She put her backpack on the counter and pulled out the Naruken. Icarus fell silent. Very gently, as if it were a fragile little creature, he stroked the book's beautiful cover. Even more gently he opened the book and leafed through its first pages.
"Where did you get this book, Hoggy?"
The man's clever grey eyes studied the girl with curiosity. Hoggy blushed.
"Scooter and I, we borrowed it from our friend's grandfather."
"What a generous grandfather your friend has," Icarus remarked. "Not many people would part with a book so rare and so wonderful."
"You know what this book is?"
The bookseller nodded.
"Indeed I do. It is the Naruken, the Book of Vipers. It is the most complete history of the race of dragons ever written. What's more, it is perhaps the only book of its kind left in the whole world."
"What language is this?"
"Gaelic, or rather Old Gaelic, the way this language was spoken 1,000 years ago."
"You can speak Gaelic? Oh, this is so cool!"
Icarus blushed. "Well, I don't actually speak Old Gaelic, seeing as there are no speakers of this language left alive to have a conversation with, but I can read it."
Hoggy leaned on the counter and pointed to the picture of a red dragon.
"What does it say here?"
Icarus sat down on his stool, his eyeglasses on the tip of his nose, and scanned the text underneath the picture.
"This is the story of Arzi Dark, a Persian king who could turn into a dragon. And here," he pointed at the column of verses on the next page, "is the Dragon King's incantation."
"What's incantation?"
"It is a magic spell," Icarus explained. "This one can be used to tame a dragon. Want to learn it?"
"Sure,"
Hoggy replied.
"Well then, repeat after me."
Icarus cleared his throat and recited,
"Kalina, Sadazar, Barium, Kivalu, Evina Fa Lucida, Devanam Uvaru."
Hoggy repeated the words of the Dragon King's incantation.
"Did the spell actually work?"
she asked. "It did, according to the man who wrote the book," Icarus replied. "But then again, maybe he just wanted to improve the sales." The shop owner and his young friend laughed.